Recent research from the Pew Center tells us that 86% of Americans today believe that cohabitating before you get married is acceptable and okay. Today on the Ferguson Home, we want to give you a different perspective.
Welcome to the Ferguson Home. We're so glad you're joining us this week. If you haven't subscribed already, please click below and subscribe. That lets us know that you are liking these videos so that we're encouraged to keep doing them. And we thank you for everybody last week that subscribed. We did get over 200, which is, it's a big deal for us. So this week on the Ferguson Home, we're going to tackle this question: why shouldn't we live together before marriage? And it is so common in today's society. It's so the norm that we are totally going to go against the norm today and probably have a lot of objections, but that's okay. We're going to share, you're in our home. So we're going to share why we're pretty passionate going against what culture says is okay.
Yeah, and this is a really a situation that has changed a lot in the culture in the last 30 years. There used to be kind of a stigma against living together before you're married, and now the culture has swung so far the other direction that you're really in the minority if you don't live together before you get married. And so we see that increase in culture at large, but we also see that increase within the church and within the believing community where the number of young couples that come to me to do their wedding who are already living together is really high. I'd say probably 90% of the couples that I interact with. And so it's just become acceptable and kind of normative, like this is what you're supposed to do. And you know, what's interesting for Barry and I is, of course, we work with marriages, trying to help people to stay married and stay faithful to each other. But what we see as we look at the data is that one of the reasons that we think cohabitation has become so popular today is because this is the generation that is really the children of the divorce generation.
They haven't seen it work well, and they don't want that.
That's right, So if you look at the data between really 1960 and the mid-'80s, divorce just took off in the culture as no-fault divorce laws became common across the country, and so divorce just spiked. And then what happened is the children of that generation are now the generation that are growing up and saying, we're not really sure about marriage, you know, because we've seen our parents go through divorce and pain, and maybe we're the product of that. And so let's live together, but let's not make that commitment. And I think there's just a general fear of commitment in this generation.
I wonder if there's also that. I wonder if there's any thoughts that you're actually helping your kids by not making that commitment to your partner, so that then if it doesn't work out, it might not look as hard and ugly as it did when you were a child and your parents were going through divorce. Like, I wonder if you actually, there's a sense of, I'm protecting my kids.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I mean, most of the reasons we hear from people is they say, well, I want to test their relationship before I get married. Or what's becoming more common that we hear is people saying it's about their finances. Like, well, we can't afford to live separate, so we're going to live together. And it's just a really interesting way to think about it.
Or just more convenient. Like, instead of having to, and that goes with the finances, but instead of having two homes and having to travel back and forth to see each other, like, you know, so it's just convenience factor.
So what's the problem with all of that? We kind of laid out the issue and what's going on in our culture today, but we want to say, okay, we want to just present some contrary thinking about why this push for cohabitation could be a problem for couples as they're thinking about their future together.
I just was thinking back as we were preparing for this, in Re-Engage, one of the talks that Keith gives is on, is it the Why Not Divorce talk that you give? And he talks about closing all the doors, that oftentimes that we will go into marriage or relationship, but we leave at least windows open. There are some escape paths that are readily available for if this doesn't work out. And so he really challenges the couples in the room to change that mentality and to shut and lock all of the doors and all of the windows to where there is you're in it together. And the reminder that we believe that the Lord is in that room also, but you don't have an out. And we get so much feedback that when couples make that decision, so they come in, we've had couples come in that they are already in the process of divorce, or they're leaning towards divorce, and then God moves in that session and they make the decision and they verbally let each other know we're in it, we're shutting all the doors. And the security and the peace that comes from that, we see the most help from that decision than most other decisions throughout the semester. So yeah, there's something to that of the security of, wait a second, we're both in it.
Yeah, part of what Barry's pressing on here is just by definition, a couple that is cohabitating together that's not married and a couple who are married are actually in two totally different relationships. And so even the whole idea that we're going to test out our compatibility by living together is really not thinking correctly about the relationship, because when you're living together but not married, you're not testing marriage because you're not married. You're testing cohabitating together. So you know what happens is, in a cohabitating relationship, you're really performing for each other, you know, and so you're not really learning what it looks like to live with the actual person as they would be in the marriage relationship, because people change when they get married. And when you're in that performance track of you know, trying to really prove to your partner that you deserve to be married to them, you're kind of faking a little bit like what you're going to be like, and then you cross that marriage threshold and you change some of your behaviors. And so the only way to really know what it's like to be married to somebody is to be married to somebody. And so we want to challenge that assumption a little bit and say, we just think it just increases so much anxiety in the relationship when you don't have that commitment.
Well, the statistics say that those that are in cohabitating relationships and not married, they have a lot higher levels of anxiety, because you just don't know when the person's going to bail. There's not that feeling of commitment and we're in this together. There's higher statistics for depression. And so, there's something about committing. And what are you communicating to your partner when you're like, I like you and you're worth a half-hearted like you're worth us living together, and I like sex with you and I like all the good stuff, but I don't quite know if you're worth my commitment and my covenant to you, you know, to be in it. And so to me, that's kind of like, I mean, I wouldn't want that.
Yeah. And so we want you to see, like, it's not just our opinion. There's a lot of research behind this that sociologists are starting to understand and see as they've tracked this over the last 30 years, that there is this increase of anxiety, of depression, of stress on the relationship, of just instability, like a higher risk of divorce. And so we want to talk about, like, what should we do moving forward, because there are these problems that start to come up whenever you cohabitate before marriage. And I want to just point out Hebrews 13:4, which says this: marriage is to be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept undefiled. And so we want to especially speak to Christians that are listening to this to say, it's not just like society and research that shows us there's problems with cohabitation, but it's also God in His Word that is telling us, hey, there's a better way to do a long-term relationship, and that is to get married. Like, rather than kind of putting your toe in the water and saying, well, do I maybe not want to be in this relationship? We want to encourage you, because this scripture says marriage is to be honored, and that is that you make that commitment. Like, jump in with both feet and say, I'm in this relationship. And then also, like, the second half of this verse that says the marriage bed should be kept undefiled and pure is a big one for me. And that is that the same practices that keep you pure before you're married are the same practices that keep you faithful when you are married. And I think that's where a lot of couples miss it on the cohabitation front, is they think, well, we're kind of halfway married, so it's okay for us to have sex because we're living together. And, you know, a lot of couples, Christian couples that I'll talk to, say, well, we're not necessarily having sex, we're just living together. And I want to say, who are we kidding? Like, if you're living together, you're having sex. I mean, like, if you're living together and you're sleeping in the same bed and you're not having sex, we have a whole nother problem. So, like, let's just be honest about what the issue is. And so if you're committed to say sex needs to stay within the marriage relationship, then you wouldn't put yourself in the situation where you're living with somebody that you're sexually attracted to, because you're going to give into that temptation. And you say, well, why is that a big deal? The reason it's a big deal is because if you start off your relationship with that practice, think about this. You start off your marriage relationship with the practice of having sex outside the marriage covenant. Then what is going to keep you from having sex outside the marriage covenant when you're married? Right? So the behavior of sleeping with somebody before you're married and already breaking down that boundary is going to really cause your conscience to not have a problem with having an affair in marriage and breaking that marriage
because
covenant.
Your action reflects your belief.
That's right.
down below. And so your action of thinking it's fine for us to sleep together now, we don't have to be married, that reflects the belief that is a low value on commitment to your spouse or your significant other, and the commitment to all my sexual activity is going to be with you.
That's right.
And so that belief is still there, and is going to play even after you do get married, and it's going to play out in a different way.
That's
you haven't changed the belief. And so, just remember your actions, there's always a belief at the root and a value that is supplying that action, drive for that action.
That's right. And so we want to encourage you, like before you take that step of cohabitation, you're dating someone, you really feel like you're connected with them, you want to be married to them, rather than saying, hey, let's take this intermediate step, what we want to encourage you to do is for you to actually take the step of getting married and to really believe that the marriage commitment is worth making and not just kind of halfway doing the marriage relationship. And so we're big believers in marriage. That's what we say on this channel all the time, is that we think that marriage is just such a value and a priority, and it needs to be honored. And so we just want to encourage you, take that step.
And here's the deal. It's not working. Whatever we're trying, however we're following the ways of culture, it's not working. People are more miserable. People are having less sex. All the statistics, like everything that we desire and we think we're getting by following the ways of the culture, it's not working out for us. Depression's going up. Everything is that we don't want to try, go up is going up, and everything that we do want to go up is going down. So what if we shake it up and we choose to say, okay, what does God say? And let's be radical and let's do it like he says it, because maybe God's onto something, because he's our creator. And I read this article and I just love this just picture of what could be. It says, how different would our culture be today if each of us remained pure before marriage and faithful to our spouse within our marriage? Imagine a world without pornography, prostitution, sex trafficking, and adultery. This is the freedom and purity that God intends for us. And y'all, we've seen it. We say this not because we have made every decision perfectly, because we are far from that, and we mess up every day. But we have seen God's blessing in choosing to follow God's way for marriage and for our relationship. And we enjoy each other. We're passing on to our kids. Thankfully, they get to see that marriage is fun and worth pursuing. And so give that gift to your children. Fight for a healthy marriage and try it God's way. What do you have to lose?
Yeah. And for the person watching this video, maybe who has cohabitated before they got married, and now they're raising kids and they're thinking, well, I don't have a good testimony in this area. What could I say to my kids? Because I lived together with my wife before we were married. I think we would just encourage you. We're not saying tell your children this because your example is perfect. What we're saying is, like in all of our testimonies, is to lift up the ways of Christ to the next generation and just own it where you messed up and say, hey, we did it this way. We believe this narrative that the culture told us, and it didn't help, and it wasn't the right thing to do. And we want to encourage you to try it a better way, and that's God's way.
And that God could use you to change the pattern for future generations, for your kids and grandkids, by you saying, no, today we're changing our pattern. Today we're going to choose to follow what God says. And how God could use you no matter what your past is. That's a beautiful part about Scripture, is that every single person in Scripture besides Jesus is messed up, right? So it's not even like we need to be perfect or we need to get it figured out, because we're thankful for the grace that's found in the gospel of Jesus. But we can fight for help, and we can change the course and choose now to put a stake in the ground and do it God's way.
Thanks for watching this video this week. We hope we've challenged your thinking a little bit and encouraged you to consider God's ways. We love you, praying for you, and hope this video has been a blessing to you.